Thank you so much for joining us today for this special edition of the Ishaan S Show. I want to, for this episode, take you to January of 2021. It was the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our economy was falling behind and our democracy was on the brink after an insurrection just a few weeks ago. At that moment, as a country, we sent one man to fix the problems. We trusted him to meet the moment and fix this broken country that so desperately needed healing after 4 years of chaos left by his predecessor, who had left the White House in disgrace. In that moment, it was no easy feat. No matter what the new president did, he was going to make people upset. He wasn't in the business, though, of making people happy. He was there to change lives, and he thought that people would hopefully then notice. But did he upset people enough that his once disgraced predecessor would come back 4 years later, sandwiching him in the history books? Did he think that his predecessor would come in on a platform of completely altering the economy that he helped rescue? Did he think that his vice president, who would have to suddenly take his place in an election, would have to certify her own loss to his predecessor? 4 years to the day in the election, incited an insurrection through it all. The question he keeps asking himself is, how will he be remembered? So this is strange to think about, but this will be the last Ishaan S Show episode of the Biden presidency. It's crazy. This show started in 2021 when Biden was just 6 months into his term. I don't know if any of us could have really imagined the whirlwind of chaos that we all collectively lived through in that time. We watched, so much to reach this half point of the decade. Lately, I myself have been looking back at this presidency and thinking about this moment in American history. How will it be remembered? What are people going to say about it? And make no mistake, this moment will undoubtedly go down in history as a turning point. And on a personal level, I owe a lot of this show to everything that's happened in the last 4 years. So this is a really weird time of change, I think, for anybody. So President Biden, what about him? When I think about him, I think he will go down as a consequential president one day. I don't think today, this year, or even 10 years from now, we'll necessarily be seeing him as this historic actor. But when I look back at everything that has happened in the last 4 years, I think Joe Biden will go down in history. Whether that's good or bad, that's your worldview. That has to do with your worldview. But he'll be remembered as a force of change in American history. It's kind of like President Jimmy Carter. He left the presidency after losing so bad in the Electoral College. It took years for historians to then eventually recognize his impact on the country, a positive impact. And when he died just a few weeks ago, 50 years after leaving the White House, history has been far kinder to him and his legacy than the moment when he left. And I think history is going to similarly view Joe Biden. To understand why, you need to turn back to who Joe Biden is and what it took for him to be president.
So help me God. Congratulations, Mr. President.
Joe Biden was someone who dreamed of becoming president for decades. From the moment he was elected as the youngest U.S. senator in 1972 at the age of 29, it would take Biden 50 years to eventually be elected as the oldest president in American history. That journey included 3 attempts to run for president and a stint as Barack Obama's vice president for 8 years. Through it all, Biden had he had this very desperate taste to be president. So in 2020, when third time's a charm, he was handed the opportunity to be president, it was after every other Democrat in a crowded primary of 19 dropped out and consolidated their support behind him. He was seen as the dragon slayer that had to take on Donald Trump, and he did that. Now, like I said, he only came to the White House after the complete disruption of the peaceful transfer of power. Donald Trump never wanted to lose to Joe Biden. I mean, if you remember in 2019, he even tried to threaten the president of Ukraine to find dirt on Joe Biden, which actually resulted in Donald Trump getting impeached. It's crazy to think about how all of these characters would play out in American history in just a few years. But you know, the point is that Trump didn't want to lose to Biden. So he put up a fit. He sowed doubt in the electoral system and incited a literal insurrection. Obviously, I should note that Donald Trump does not still take responsibility for January 6th, but that doesn't matter right now. What happened, and Joe Biden was going to take over as the president of the United States. So I thought a lot about how I wanted to approach this episode. I could have done one of those chronological timeline things, but I figured that wouldn't necessarily do much in telling you about what he did. So instead, I want to look at this from a lens of Joe Biden, the man himself, and talk about how he found his place in the moment. Some things will go together, other things won't, but all of them will shape who he is. And I don't think I'd be doing this right if I didn't start with the most important aspect of the Biden presidency, in my opinion, and that's foreign policy.
America is back. Diplomacy is back.
Joe Biden campaigned for president on this idea of restoring America's place on the world stage. He claimed, at least, with some merit at least, that Donald Trump had damaged America's image to other countries everywhere. He alienated our allies and emboldened our adversaries. So going in, I think the expectation was for a foreign policy that would return to normal, and it did. But 3 issues happened during this presidency, and I think they will define Joe Biden's foreign policy and, in broader stroke, his presidency. These issues will start with, chief among them, the Afghanistan withdrawal. This ultimately was what set President Biden up for failure. The United States was in Afghanistan for 20 years after spending hundreds of billions of dollars on all sorts of things there. So there was this appetite in the American electorate to leave. Now, how that would happen was unclear. Biden didn't negotiate any of the terms of the deal, nor did he actually run on doing this. This was actually a bunch of policy that Donald Trump negotiated and left for Biden. A deal that was negotiated with the Taliban, I should point out, after Trump invited them onto American soil to negotiate. The withdrawal was supposed to happen in May, but then Biden extended it to August of 2021, and that's all he did. Everything else was Trump. The good, the bad, everything. It didn't matter, though, because Joe Biden was the commander-in-chief, and he owned that withdrawal. And it was a complete and utter disaster. And it will be, in my view, the biggest policy failure of this administration. 13 service members died in this process. Innocent Afghans who helped our forces were left stranded. The Taliban would swiftly take over Afghanistan, and they now impose some of the most backwards, stringent, and draconian policies of any country in the world, specifically harming Afghan women. And Joe Biden and his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, for their part, have said they're proud of their choices. Republicans turned it into a rallying cry. They blamed him for all of it, and really that was what marked the end of the Biden honeymoon period. From this point on, there was no point where Joe Biden had a positive approval rating. After Afghanistan, though, the next global challenge was the invasion of Ukraine. Russia launched its illegal and indiscriminate invasion of Ukrainian territory in February of 2022, and through it, Vladimir Putin, dictator of Russia, tried to tell the world that he didn't care. We knew for weeks that this was going to happen, and I remember those really intense moments of the invasion. I remember the coverage on the news, and I remember how experts said that Ukraine had 72 hours before it fell. Spoiler alert, the experts were wrong, and they are still fighting to this day, and I think a lot of credit for that goes to Joe Biden. After that failure in Afghanistan, the Ukraine issue became a test of confidence in Joe Biden's foreign policy skills. He met the moment, and he managed to rally the world and NATO more specifically behind the Russian threat. He collaborated with the G7 and NATO and other Western nations, and with them, Joe Biden imposed some of the most stringent tariffs on Russia, or not tariffs, sanctions on Russia. He devastated their economy. He turned Russia into a pariah. Even if Russia is economically standing up right now, it's only because they're forced to do business with other global pariahs like Iran and North Korea. They don't have access to what we have. He cut them off the SWIFT banking network. He targeted their energy sector. He went after their currency. All the while, he provided Ukraine with life-saving, country-saving military assistance and assembled a coalition of nations behind him. He worked with the Congress and sent $65 billion to help Ukraine keep fighting and to keep standing. And it's important. It's so important on a global stage for global stability for us to understand why Ukraine needs to stand. I won't go into it because it's been explained enough, but we shouldn't be giving dictators like Vladimir Putin territory in Russia. But, the support, even then, there are some people on the right that villainize him for sending money to a foreign country. But if we look at it on the grand scale of things, I think this will be one of the most important successes of Biden's presidency. And then lastly, on that foreign policy realm, I want to talk about the Middle East again. On October 7th, 2023, the terrorist group Hamas attacked Israel and killed 1,200 innocent Israeli citizens and took hundreds of hostages who they hid under tunnels throughout Palestinian territory. In the immediate aftermath, Israel launched an all-out and brutal assault in the Gaza Strip in Palestine in the name of eliminating Hamas. However, the resulting devastation that has come from this response in Gaza is insurmountable. I mean, tens of thousands of lives, innocent Palestinian lives, have been taken as a result of Israel's indiscriminate attacks. Biden, actually, in the immediate aftermath of this attack, threw his 100% behind Israel, right behind its leader, Benjamin Netanyahu. Since the attack, the United States, under Joe Biden's direction, has sent countless weapons, ammunition, missiles, and a whole host of other tools of war for Israel's retaliation, which tragically has resulted in the deaths of innocents everywhere. There are stories of entire families being wiped, children losing limbs, and people even starving. It's uncomfortable to talk about, but that is what's happening there. The hostages were brutally and inhumanely held for the duration of this conflict, and it's just tragic for all those innocent civilians who have been caught up in this. But for people like Benjamin Netanyahu, who are in office on borrowed time, they saw that dragging out this conflict was what was necessary for their survival. It came at the expense of innocent lives. Now, this will unquestionably be tied to President Biden's legacy, his unconditional support of Netanyahu's agenda. Even though he did express outrage at the devastation, it was too late. Countless groups in this country justifiably are and will continue to be upset by the all-out support of what was happening in Israel, or at least the silence. And all of this on the count of American weapons. They will tie Joe Biden's legacy to this. But I should point out, in the waning days of his presidency, Joe Biden was able to get through a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, which would bring back 33 hostages in exchange for an unnamed number of Palestinian prisoners in Israel and a 6-week pause in the fighting. That goes into effect tomorrow. But there's no doubt that this will be what Joe Biden is tied with among all sorts of, for people all around, in all swaths of the Democratic tent. History will tie him to it, and we'll wait for it later, but we'll see how he's tied and graded for it. If Afghanistan was what sparked Joe Biden's unpopularity, this conflict solidified it. Now, I know I got into heavy stuff that happened around the world, but shifting gears back here to home, when we look at Joe Biden's work, I think historians are going to match his presidency's foreign policy failures to its domestic victories. I think back 20, 30, 50, maybe even 80 years back to FDR. And I don't really think any American president has managed to achieve more legislatively than Joe Biden has. He managed to pass the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the CHIPS and Sciences Act, the PRO Act. These are big achievements that Joe Biden managed to pull off in just 4 years. These are achievements that most two-term presidents could only dream of doing. And look, I'm not even exaggerating. That. Like, the fact is that Joe Biden was able to do so much. And that could even be seen as a bad thing. Like, with all of these policies, he had a lot of spending, and it's a lot of spending. But it depends on how you see that spending. But it is huge amounts, and that's what makes it historic. Biden ran on a platform of being a legislator. The Senate was his home, and it showed. Every day, roads and bridges are being built for the first time, or they're being repaired for the first time in 30 years. For the first time in a long time, there's meaningful gun violence prevention legislation and action at the federal level. 17 million jobs have been created. Inflation is going down. For the first time in a decade, semiconductor chips, which are primarily exclusively made in Taiwan, are being built in America in foundries in states everywhere, like Arizona specifically is where they're starting. His leadership in these investments in the climate and green economy have been historic. Despite so many thorns in his side, like people like Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who made life difficult for him, he managed to pull off a lot. And I know, like, he's done historic work. I made 80 episodes talking about it. So you can listen to all of them, because there's no way that I could cover everything that Joe Biden has done in this single episode. But you get the idea. At a domestic level, he managed to achieve a lot. But with the triumphs, there are also hiccups. The biggest issue for him was inflation. Our prices went up exponentially. Now, there's an argument to be made that this was also the fault of his predecessor, who imposed crazy large tariffs and gave tax cuts to the rich and added trillions with a T to our debt. But many of the things that Biden did also brought us to this. He also did this, and he was handed an economy. Many people blame Joe Biden for the spikes in everyday groceries. They were hurting, and they were upset, rightfully so. This became one of Biden's biggest crutches, his presidency's biggest crutches. When we look back at this past election, I think it's what cost Democrats the White House. The colloquial phrase, "it's the economy, stupid," is going to be what he is remembered for in his handling. Because even though at an aggregate macro level prices were going down, people's wallets were still hurting. It's as simple as that. In June of 2022, another thing that happened was when the Supreme Court overturned 50 years of precedent when they overturned the landmark Roe v. Wade decision, which provided a constitutional protection for abortion in this country. Biden challenged that notion and fought the decision in his own historic action. Another topic is the issue of immigration. The southern border crisis became a defining issue for the past 4 years. Millions of undocumented immigrants came into this country without following the general procedure. Republicans, in turn, made this issue into something that the public had to fear. But it worked, and people were worried. Now, Biden did have an opportunity to fix the border crisis by imposing one of the strictest immigration policies to strengthen the border, to hire more agents, and provide more tech. Republicans were the one who blocked it at the direction of Donald Trump, because they knew that if Joe Biden managed to solve this problem, the Republicans wouldn't have much to run on. So the bill did fail, and our border remained in the same state. Ultimately, it was another issue that cost Democrats the White House. And then, of course, it's the beginning, then we talk about the beginning of the end of the Biden years. At the age of 82, Joe Biden was the oldest president in American history, and he wanted 4 more years. Between strife from young people to allegations of being senile to everything in between, Biden struggled to separate himself from his age. Father time is the only thing that all of us will have to face, that none of us will be able to escape. And Joe Biden was coming to terms with that. After an awful debate performance on June 27th, Democrats freaked out and wanted Joe Biden to leave the race. The 3 weeks after that debate were probably the darkest for Democrats in a long time. Everyone in America was questioning his abilities, his age, whether he was up to the job. And slowly but surely, members of Congress eventually started publicly saying that he needed to go. Once close friends like Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama were privately expressing doubts in Joe Biden's capabilities as the Democratic nominee. Not about his age, but just his ability to win. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer was the one who was actually drafted to go to Joe Biden's summer home in July and sit down with him for a long time to explain in simple words that he had no path to winning. He claimed that in a secret ballot of only 5 Democrat senators would back him. Democrats everywhere saw the math. Biden would not only lose the White House, but he would lose Democrats' Congress. It would have been a generational setback for Democrats. In that meeting, Joe Biden only spoke twice. He asked Schumer for 1 week, and surely enough, 1 week later, he dropped out of the 2024 race and endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris. It was the first time in modern American history that a presidential nominee stepped down and handed someone else the candidacy. He went from being the standard bearer to being a lame duck. Now his legacy was going to be shaped by his vice president becoming the first woman elected president. After that, the 2024 election was only going to be even more historic and probably one of the craziest elections ever in American politics. But that brings us to Monday. 4 years to the day when one man took on the challenge of fixing this country. He will now be under the Capitol Rotunda, which rioters once stormed to see his predecessor and now successor take the oath of office. His vice president is also going to be in attendance. It will have been 2 weeks since she certified her loss to his predecessor after stepping up and taking her spot. The man taking the oath will plausibly do just about everything to undermine what his predecessor did within his power. The presidency of Joe Biden is very similar to how he earned it. Biden spent 50 years working his butt off to eventually be elected the 46th president of the United States. Only after relentless effort, swaths of experience and always reaching high, but never always getting where he wants to. Some wonder what would have happened if Joe Biden didn't drop out, and I don't really know, but that doesn't matter. Biden's legacy is going to be marked in history for sure. He was the man who oversaw some of the biggest progress in American history, but also oversaw failures around the world, both in the loss of innocent lives and America's image. I think Joe Biden's legacy will be this: the man who stepped up in America's time of need to save her, but was held back by forces he could never control. Here's what he thinks his legacy is in his own words.
Only in America do we believe anything is possible. Like a kid with a stutter from modest beginnings in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Claremont, Delaware, sitting behind this desk in the Oval Office as President of the United States. That's the magic of America. It's all around us.
Thank you so much for joining us here at the Ishaan S Show. When you see us next, we will be in a new era of American politics. And I pledge to bring you the facts, bring you the truth, and continue to do what I've been doing on this show. I love this show with all my heart, and I know nothing will ever change that. So as we step into a new presidency, I hope you'll join me in my analysis and stick around for the show, because that's what's brought us together for this long time, and I think we'll continue to do. And it's that interesting and ever-changing world of American politics. I'll see you in the next one.